Raising up our voice for unity. Here in the now, I am hearing the now as I listen, and I listen. The sound that goes on, Can you hear now? In the here and now, hear that the song of the earth should be singing in the side, in the circle around with the sound that carries the ancient memory constantly, gracefully. Calling us to heal now, stewards are we, from the inner world to the world we see. Raising up our voice for unity. Here in the now, I am hearing the now as I listen, and 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 I listen.
What's up, Internet? It's Eurosoul once again, and I'm going to be talking about truth today. What is truth? And I can easily talk about this for hours, and I'm going to do my best to cut this short. So, truth. Truth is a term which refers to the comparison of one thing to another. So we have in the idea of woodworking, archery, and other experiences that humans have, you can use the word truth. This arrow flew true through the air and hit the target. My cut was true in woodworking. It means it's aligned. It's in agreement with something else, basically. The arrow was in agreement with, the aim caused the arrow to fly to the target. Everything was aligned. That's what true actually really means. Which means that often people reach the conclusion, therefore, that they think that absolute truth can't exist. They basically think that all truth is subjective. You have your truth, I have my truth, and we might agree on some things, but there is no real way to get to the absolute truth of anything. I disagree with that, and here's why. If you say, I exist, out loud, and then you feel it, and you feel how that felt to say that, this is true for me anyway, then you say, I do not exist, and feel the difference. You're going to feel probably a difference in the resonance in your body of how you feel in response to saying those two things. One of them is strong and confident, and yeah, I'm certain that's true, I do exist. And the other one is like, oh, well, I don't know about that. I mean, I do exist. Why would I say I don't exist? Kind of thing. You can feel the difference. You know it. You know you exist. So therefore, it's absolutely true that you exist. So therefore, you found something that is absolutely true. And, you know, you might disagree that other people exist. You might say, well, I'm not really sure that these other people exist. You know, I mean, I can see them, but I could question that. I could say, well, maybe it's an illusion or a simulation or something. Maybe they're all me. Maybe there is only me. You know, all these things that people have thought. I'm not going to go into that side of things, but my point here simply is that there is an absolute truth to be known. And you can use that feeling of absolute truth to compare to other ideas. So you can say anything, you can think or say anything and see how you feel about it, and then assess how different that feeling is to your feeling of certainty about existing. So you can gauge from your feelings, at least from your perspective, how true something is. Now the key here is that your feelings offer a much deeper source of guidance than most people realise. And in fact, many people have denied their feelings so heavily that they have absolutely no clue that intuition even exists, let alone that intuition actually offers useful information. A way to begin to understand this might be to consider that your eyes, which many people will trust, and your ears, which many people will trust, can only see and hear a certain distance. But you can feel things that have happened a lot further away. You know, the sound ultimately gets converted into low frequencies and travels through the earth. You can feel those vibrations. And it's possible to, once you really tune into your intuition and your feelings, you can feel a lot more than that too. An example would be, for example, many people, let's say parents, it's well documented that many parents can feel when, or other relatives can feel when their family members are coming to harm, even though they might be over the other side of the world. My point is that your feelings are very important when it comes to knowing what the truth is. And many people will try and say, oh, well, I'm a person of science and you must rely on logic. Emotions just are distractions. They don't ever get to the truth. You don't get to the truth in science through emotions. Well, I would completely disagree with that. It is a complicated subject, and I understand why they say that, But you need to realise that I have a degree in systems engineering, basically. I've been a professional systems engineer for decades. I've been programming computers since I was 4 years old, and that's whatever that is, 36 years. I have a lot of experience of using logic and science and studying scientific documents and thinking in a scientific way. If I don't think in the correct way logically, then what I do professionally doesn't work. So basically I don't get paid unless I use logic in a reliable way. Computers are not forgiving when it comes to logic. If you try, you can't just try and be nice to a computer and get your program to run. It doesn't work. You know, the computer's just going to say, no, it doesn't work. That's it. So I've been forced, basically, to become quite rigorous in my use of logic. And I'm confident of that. And I know for sure that emotions have a role to play in getting to the truth. And if you just block out emotions, you've lost a significant amount of your potential guidance that you need to actually get to the truth. And when people say, oh, well, scientific studies only look at logic and, you know, that's the highest standard of understanding we have is science. Well, first of all, you need to realise that the people that design the experiments have emotions, hopefully, although a lot of them have probably blocked a lot of them out by now, but they do have some emotions and they are being guided by some emotions. And yes, the scientific method often is used to try to sort of remove emotions from the equation. That isn't done because emotions don't have a role. It's because emotions ultimately are subjective and they do have the capacity to warp thinking. That doesn't mean to say that emotions don't also have the ability to help you get to the truth as well. You know, basically, if you're out of balance as an individual, if you're emotionally unstable or unhealthy, which most people actually are, because they've been blocking out emotions over a long period of time, then your emotions aren't going to be healthy. They're not going to be optimal. They're not going to be guiding your logic in the best possible way. They're going to be pulling your mind in all kinds of directions that don't lead you to the truth. And that's really why people, I would say, don't trust emotions and will say that emotions aren't helpful when getting to the truth. However, if you've gone through a sometimes lengthy process of emotional healing so that you actually accept and process your denied and unhealed injuries and emotions from the past, then gradually your emotional field clears up and you don't have those problems. Your mind doesn't get pulled to one side here and there by all these other feelings and unresolved issues. You're actually able to focus with accuracy on what you're talking about and store and retrieve information in the way that was intended. You become effectively a healed and balanced human being. At that point, your emotions are in real time. They're in the now moment. They're coming from the now moment. They're giving you direct feedback on what's happening and what you're focusing on. And then they become useful. And you're able to filter out all the noise that you were experiencing before, or it just isn't there, basically. You're not struggling with trying to filter out the noise. Ultimately, a lot of it's just gone. So now you're able to actually get the message of the real intuition, the real emotions, and you will find it's dead on all the time. It's accurate. It's just accurate. It's that simple. And you know, most people probably have had some experiences of suddenly knowing something and not really knowing how they knew it. The more you heal yourself, the more that becomes normal. And basically you're able to know things without your eyes seeing them, without you hearing them, and you're proved over and over and again to be correct in what that information gave you. Unfortunately, most people's belief systems are sort of limited and they're controlling the way they think so that they don't allow that kind of thing to be real. And if they see evidence of that happening, then they will disregard it and they'll just say, no, that can't possibly be true. Or that maybe if they're open-minded, they'll file it away and say, oh, that was interesting, but then they'll forget about it because the confusion and nonsense they've got in their minds just blocks it out and they just forget it. So that brings me on to really what I want to be talking about here. Aside from that very important understanding of how to get to the truth, which is to listen partially to your feelings, to have an open mind, to question everything, what I want to talk about here is confirmation bias and the fact that people regurgitate information from other people and the harm it's doing to us and to the planet. And I have to say, after decades of talking to large numbers of people about important issues, aiming to help the world find peace and solve our problems, I know that the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems, probably the biggest problem that I face in doing that, is so many people are certain that what they believe is true, and yet they haven't done any research, or enough research, open-minded research, to find out whether they've assessed all of the information involved. And sometimes they're going to attack other people because they feel threatened when that person presents information that contradicts them. Because they're not being completely honest, they will ultimately, they're going to feel a pressure when something comes to contradict what they've been saying. Especially if, like, for example, you're a scientist or you're a famous doctor or a politician or whoever it is who's made a career out of pushing a certain viewpoint. that actually isn't true, and that maybe you actually genuinely think is true, when the evidence comes along to contradict you, that's valid evidence, if you're open-minded and honest, you're going to say, wow, in the last 30 years I've been misled and I've been misleading other people. I should really do things to take action to correct that, as some people have done, and I can show you examples of, in the water industry, for example, people who were convinced that fluoride was safe and effective, then when they actually took the time to really dedicate themselves to looking at the science and doing their own research, they realised that wasn't true. And a really good documentary, An Inconvenient Tooth, definitely recommend watching that, with lots of people from the water industry and government bodies responsible for monitoring water health and safety and all this stuff, who basically, professors, you name it, basically saying what I just said. They had thought all this stuff was true, they believed what they were told by the establishment and the mainstream over all these years, and then suddenly they were forced to reckon with the fact that it's actually wrong, and the science actually contradicts what they've been telling people. When you're surrounded by those kinds of people, or you are those kinds of people, you've got all these pressures and emotional biases, basically, causing you to deny reality. And it's unfortunate that people will say, oh, you must use the scientific method and we should only trust science because it doesn't involve emotions, and emotions take away from the truth. It's unfortunate the number of people who are using science and using it in emotional ways and then claiming not to be. So, in other words, their own fear of being wrong is causing them to deny evidence that contradicts what they claim to be true. Setting aside the fact that there are a huge number of scientific studies out there which are fake and which basically have been bought and paid for by people who've got limitless pockets, corporations, who are wrong and corrupt and who literally don't give a shit about humanity and are just here to make themselves rich. Basically, the numbers of studies of that nature are huge. We've seen cases of Bayer, Monsanto recently having been found to their products cause cancer and basically have to pay out compensation, now opening the doors for thousands of other people to get compensation for one of their biggest products. The biggest herbicide in the world, Roundup, causes cancer. I've known that for a long time. Other scientists have known that for a long time because they'd done the work and they'd published studies on that showing that. But because Bayer, Monsanto, presumably Monsanto mainly at the time, Bayer bought Monsanto not so long ago, because they were basically paying to have fraudulent science put out by corrupt people in large numbers, here's the thing. Policies are set based on what's called the weight of the evidence, often. And that basically means people look at the scientific evidence available from studies and they weigh up, what's most likely to be true based on everything that they can see. Take that into consideration. Weight. Weight refers to quantity. So if you've got 100 studies saying that something's safe and 2 studies saying that it's not safe, lazy thinking is going to just, I'm going to err on the side of caution. There's 100 studies here saying that it's safe. It's probably safe. No. You must take into consideration the cost involved in doing such studies and the profits that can be attained through the conclusions you reach. If a company knows they're going to make $1 trillion from lying to you, they're going to spend millions and millions of dollars, possibly, making fake studies. They're going to produce them all day long. And it's going to be done by scientists, people with scientific training who are bought off or who are just idiots, whatever you want to call it. Basically, untrustworthy people, whoever they are, for whatever reason, whatever led those persons to make the decisions that they made, they're going to be able to get these studies produced in high quantities. And the people who don't have those budgets, whose only interest is basically getting to the truth and protecting humanity, they don't necessarily have the budget to run endless studies, to produce 100 studies that show that the 100 studies put out by these corporations are wrong. So you're going to end up having a biased amount of information coming at you, and more is going to be coming from the people with the most money, who are the companies who basically served, who are going to be able to make the most money from it. And they can buy people out, and they have done, and there's many whistleblowers who have stated this on record in court, won court cases, showing that this happens every day in the medical industry, in other industries as well. So with all of that in mind, if you aren't questioning all that stuff, and if you're blindly following these alleged voices of authority, or you are an alleged voice of authority, and that basically means most of your belief systems and the choices you made in your life are based on errors and lies, when evidence comes along to contradict you, you're going to feel frightened, probably, because you're going to realise your life is based on lies, and you've probably hurt yourself and lots of people that you cared for as a result of things you thought being true that weren't true. And now that's a shock. You know, you could get disowned, you could lose your job, you could lose your mortgage, you could lose your house. People could maybe even kill you because of the things you've done, if it was that extreme, if you don't handle it in the right way. And that's going to cause a lot of fear because you're not grounded in your own emotional self, because you're dealing with imbalanced psychology and emotional issues that you haven't healed. You're not necessarily going to be able to respond to that kind of challenge to your perception about reality in a stable way. And you also aren't going to be ready to process the information, the emotions that come up. So you're going to go into fight or flight mode quietly inside yourself. And you're either going to attack the people presenting the evidence, or you're going to become terrified and do other things. Who knows what you're going to do, but you're definitely not going to admit to being wrong. You know, you might become very defensive and lie even more, whatever it is. And we see this over and over again. I've seen it in the vaccine situation with various alleged experts being cross-examined on these subjects, and the only time, it very rarely happens that a real experienced person who knows about this subject gets to cross-examine them. It did happen with Dr. Stanley Plotkin, one of the inventors of some of the earlier vaccines, and I watched a 9-hour deposition by him in court not so long ago. I watched all 9 hours of it because it's so unusual to see that. And he, as far as I'm concerned, and probably most people, to be honest, he didn't come out well in that. You know, he's meant to be there showing the world the vaccines are safe and effective, yet he really wasn't able to offer good answers to nearly any question that he was asked. Whether it was about his finances, who funds him, the things he was claiming were true, why they were true, where it came from, all this stuff. You know, he really was not convincing, was not reliable at all. And that doesn't surprise me, because I know that vaccines like fluoridation, like some of the other issues in society regarding health, are backed up by basically bogus science that's been bombarded and heavily funded, bombarded into the minds of the public and scientists and doctors for so long that they don't question it. And he's not used to being challenged, basically, so he's not ready to defend himself. And when he does have to defend himself, he finds he can't. And that's the same for quite a few of these people. So yeah, it's worth paying attention to cases like that when they happen and educating yourself about what's really going on, and not blindly trusting people. So I want to just bring up here confirmation bias. Wikipedia itself, not exactly a bastion of absolute truth. There's definitely a lot of false information on here, but things like this, where it's, you know, it's hard to argue about the definitions of things like this, they do tend to be accurate and a fairly good source for information. So confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favour and recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or hypothesis. So you're limiting what you will look at and what you'll talk about based on what you want to be true or what you already think is true. It's a type of cognitive bias and a systemic error of inductive reasoning. People display this bias when they gather or remember information selectively, or when they interpret it in a biased way. The effect is stronger for emotionally charged issues and for deeply entrenched beliefs. Confirmation bias is of particular current interest because of the increasing polarisation between left-wing and right-wing political viewpoints, and the gullible acceptance of the current rapid spread of fake news. So basically, people are concerned that there's false information being spread through media sources, and I've already highlighted how often that's as a result of very well-funded corporations trying to push an agenda that makes them money, if you believe it. People are concerned about that, and polarisation between what this describes as left-wing and right-wing political viewpoints. Even that's debatable as to what left-wing and right-wing really mean. Just as a history lesson, left-wing and right-wing originate in the French Revolution. Left-wing was the anti-monarchists, people that wanted change. They sat in the left wing of seats in the parliament, and the right wing of seats were the monarchists. So that's ultimately what left wing and right wing means. Right wing means traditional monarchism, kind of authoritarian hierarchic systems, domination and empire, basically. Left wing means change to that, which could be anything. That's not really what a lot of people think it means, and God, think of the number of arguments people have had about left wing and right wing that don't even fit into that at all. But anyway, because of all of this stuff that's happening, which is real, there are all these massive arguments and polarisation, and there is a lot of fake news. Because of that, people are interested in studying confirmation bias. I agree with all of that. People also tend to interpret ambiguous evidence as supporting their existing position. So instead of just saying, well, we can't really draw any accurate conclusions from this evidence, let's just use it as evidence that we'll have to reference at some point in the future, and maybe we'll understand it better. They say, oh, well, that's evidence of this because, and they'll come up with something that doesn't even make any sense. That kind of thinking, unfortunately, is being passed off as being science, often. Often people are saying, well, the weight of the evidence says this, and we know this is true. This is my favourite. When an alleged scientist says, well, we know this is true, as if he speaks for everyone, or at least every person who uses science. And no one speaks for everyone. No one speaks for everyone who uses science. But I'm such a special person, an authoritative person, that I can say, we know this or we don't know that. Like I know everything that everyone else knows. It's ridiculous. If you ever hear someone say, we know this or we know that, as if they're speaking for everyone, you know that's a major red flag and you should deeply question what they're saying and thinking. So yeah, biases, basically. And so this is where I really want to talk about fake news, because fake news gets propagated by people repeating it as if it's fact. And you can watch the videos of major sort of news channels in America, 50, 60 plus, where they're reading out a pre-prepared press release from a government source or whoever it is, and they read it as if it's their own mouth speaking, as if it's coming from their own mind, and they articulate it, ha ha ha, put all these little sort of human emotions in there, as if they understand it and they understand exactly what's being said, they know why it's being said, it's their own thoughts. Anchor people, they're anchoring ideas into you. That's why they're an anchor. Yeah, study hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming. You understand that anchoring is a process of basically implanting ideas into your mind. That's what an anchor does. So when you watch these expose videos, you'll see that 50, 60 different people in different news stations around America reading exactly word for word the same statement as if it's their own mouth speaking. And most people who watch that wouldn't realise that was happening. They'd think, oh, look, there's this shiny, happy plastic person on TV. They look like they're healthy and they're smart. I like this person. They tell me the truth. They tell me what's happening in the world. I agree with them. Yeah, you don't understand that actually that person is nothing more than a puppet, just there to connect with you on an emotional, visual level, so that the voices and that you wouldn't want to listen to in society, who you wouldn't trust, get to speak through them. Yeah, that's what's happening a lot of the time. So basically, I know the mind control techniques and social engineering theory and principles of manipulation and so on rely on 80 to 90% of the information being put out being true to gain people's trust, and then 10 to 20% of it being deliberately not true so that they're misled. And that's what's happening in mainstream media most of the time. You know, you might have entire newsreaders who are good people, who are trustworthy, who are only there to get your trust. And then the other people, you know, basically there to manipulate you and almost tell you the truth. These people are sneaky as hell, basically. They're not there. People have a sort of naive trust of other humans. They think, oh, we're all the same. Yeah, you know, people are all the same. Basically, we all want the same things. And, you know, ultimately, we don't like to lie. And, you know, no, that's not true. We're not all the same. Everyone's unique. Some people are completely evil. Some people are completely loving, almost. Some people think they're completely loving. They aren't. Some people get called evil. They aren't. You know, there's a huge range of things happening. And there definitely are people running media companies who want to lie to you to cause harm and suffering so that they get rich. And that's what I want to bring this on to now, which is the topic of Joey Carbstrong, who is a vegan activist in Australia, well, globally, but he's from Australia originally. So he basically has been going around onto various mainstream media talk shows and doing a good job of exposing the vegan issue and the fact that vegans are there to protect animals, basically. And yeah, there is what you could call a vegan diet, and it does involve not eating meat and fish and dairy and so on, but basically veganism is about protecting animals at its core. And there's lots of ridiculous arguments people come up with against veganism. Basically, what they're trying to argue for is torturing, raping and killing lots of animals, which you can't really do using rational logic, but they'll try to do it anyway, and they do it make absolute idiots of themselves on national TV. And actually, you know, they're polarising again. It's always divide and conquer. You know, and Joey does a really excellent job of not making opponents out of people. He will repeatedly say, I don't really want to, you know, I'm not trying to argue against you, particularly in the sense of I'm not trying to make you an enemy. I'd like to work with you. And that's not often what people in the mainstream media are doing. They're trying to polarize and try and make vegans out to be Nazis, or, I mean, it's ridiculous. Like militant, violent people, they really aren't. I've never met a single violent vegan. Yeah, I'm sure there are violent vegans. There's violent meat eaters. There's violent, you know, Buddhists probably. But the point is, vegans are inherently against the exploitation of animals, and that's not something you can easily argue against, and yet people try to. And he's done a good job of defending that position. So he went on to Channel 7 News in Australia, which obviously being in England I don't watch, but so they did a hit piece on him. Basically they kind of demonised him, and I mean I've seen some of it. Like he said, it was the most ridiculous thing he's ever seen. They had, it turned out afterwards he discovered that the so-called reporter who was interviewing him is like a staunch meat lover, and even at the end of the segment, the woman who came on next was going, "Who doesn't love a great Australian barbie? You know, who challenged that?" As if, like, you know, just glossing over the fact that you're actually paying to torture and abuse and rape thousands of animals is a laughing matter. But bearing in mind we're talking about a country which was founded on the exploitation of the Aboriginal people, who now get treated as subhumans mostly. You know, that's their history, isn't it? And, you know, it's part of my history as well, being as I'm from England. I didn't make that happen. I'm not supporting it, but that's partly what's happening in the subconscious of the Australian tradition. I'm sure there's lots of people that don't like that and want to change it, but there is that element and they're pandering to that. But my point anyway here is that it turns out that the CEO who owns Channel 7 News is actually a billionaire who owns a large amount of cattle and you know, like ranches in Australia. Basically, he gets rich from selling beef. And so obviously his news channel is not going to be promoting veganism. And that's probably why they did this blatantly biased hit piece on veganism. But you don't see that, do you? You don't, when you're watching the news, it doesn't say, oh, and by the way, a little message underneath. Yeah, we're declaring a bias here. Our CEO actually serves to make, he's going to get rich as a result of you having a barbecue and buying beef. It doesn't say that, does it? Scientific studies, you're obliged, as far as I know, I don't know how it's enforced, but you're basically meant to, when you publish a scientific study, declare any conflicts of interest on the front page. I have written this study on vaccines. I have a conflicting interest in that I work for this pharmaceutical company. You know, bear that in mind when you're reading it. They're not saying that they're lying, but they are saying that you should consider that because I work for this company's had an influence in this and they stand to make money out of this subject. But you don't get that from the news, do you? You actually have to go and do your own research into who owns the media companies, who are the people you're listening to find out whether or not they're going to be biased. And I actually think it would be really great to have a database on all of this stuff online, so that whenever you're watching, I mean, it could all be automated. It could literally be, if YouTube or someone like that wanted to, or DTube, any of these companies, groups that run video hosting, if they wanted to, they could hook into a database that uses machine learning to identify the speaker in the video and says, right, this speaker is this person, go to another database, they work for this company, get their LinkedIn profile or whatever, you know, this is something about their background. We can see that they have a conflicting interest with this topic because they're talking about this subject and we know that they've got this background, blah, blah, blah. Take that into consideration. That would be awesome. Things would change drastically if that happened. We don't have that right now, so we need to play it safe, and that means basically, firstly, knowing how to know what's true through your own intuition, but that means questioning when people are telling you things, asking questions about it. Don't just blindly trust them, whether it's your family member, your friend, someone on news. Question everything. Do I really know if that's true or not? Yes or no? No, I don't. All right, well, I'm okay with not knowing whether that's true or not. I'm not going to jump to a conclusion and just invent something, insert it in because it feels like I can relax a bit. Now I think I know this thing. You don't really feel at peace living a lie. That's just the fact of the situation. You don't feel peaceful numbing yourself. You feel numb. You're not going to feel really good, numb and in denial is what it comes down to. So the only way to live in truth is to live truthfully, is to accept that you don't know certain things and to do your research. And the more people do that, the more you have individually, or they have taken responsibility for themselves as a real human being, living honourably, doing what we need to actually improve life. And you'll notice that none of this that I'm describing here says you must agree with me, or that you must say that what I think is true, you know, is good, or anything like that. What I'm advocating for is everybody thinking and feeling deeply enough to know what's actually true, instead of perpetuating falseness all the time. And then you have these endless divisions in society and arguments and battles. And think of how much energy is invested in fighting that could be used to make things better. I mean, we're barely hanging on. Humanity's literally barely hanging on to life at this point, and we should be thriving. We should be having the time of our lives, running around in just ecstasy and joy without drugs because life's so awesome. That's how, in my opinion, life should be and needs to be for us to even want to be here, right? Think how far away we are from that. It's ridiculous. And think about how much energy people are putting into things that actually make that worse instead of making it better. And don't come at me with thinking you're going to use positive thinking to make the world better either. You know, basically, yeah, think optimistically if you want. Look on things you like, that's fine. But don't deny things that you don't like. Don't pretend the things you don't like don't exist. And don't bias your belief systems or your thinking just because you prefer something doesn't exist. We're not going to solve the world's problems by lying and bullshitting, basically. That is a problem. That is one of the problems that we face. So yeah, I could talk about this indefinitely. I would really like if people would go and watch my the interview I did recently with Chance from Innoverse podcast on whistleblowers, and you can look at the 30 plus posts I've made on Steemit over the last couple of years about important whistleblowers that will really blow your mind on some of these subjects. They're serious people. Some of them have gone through court cases that you've never heard about, who have had lived real lives doing really serious things. That totally expose how the extent to which the narrative you're fed through the mainstream media is lies. I really would like if more people looked at that. Go and look it up. And I really think we can make some big changes. As usual, like, subscribe, follow, re-steam, upvote if you liked what I'm doing here. And I look forward to reading your comments. And yeah, until next time, peace.